So now I would like to talk with you about hatred, greed, and ignorance as well. According to the Buddhist teachings, hatred, greed, and ignorance are the three root poisons. That is to say that all unfortunate circumstance, all experience in cyclic existence, which is always impermanent, always limited, and can never actually lead to complete fulfillment. And when I say cyclic existence, of course, I mean the cycle of death and rebirth. That within that, there is no complete fulfillment, and so all experience in cyclic existence actually arises from hatred, greed, and ignorance, or has the pollutant of hatred, greed, and ignorance in it. Where does hatred, greed, and ignorance come from? Where do they come from? They actually arise originally from the first thought of self-nature as being solid and inherently real. The first moment, or the very first consideration of self-nature, the arising of that consideration, that thought, begins with it an entire panorama of experience that happens just about simultaneously as the thought of self-nature being inherently real. And it has to, simply by virtue of the nature of that thought, simply by virtue of what the idea of self-nature actually is. In that, when one considers self-nature to be inherently real and solid, one then also has to consider other. The only way that you can define self is by considering it separate from other. Now, many of you that have attended classes with me before have heard this before. However, and you think that maybe you don't need to hear that again, but and you can even repeat it back to me. In fact, you could probably sit in this chair and give this very same teaching. However, my thought is that until I can actually see you applying it in your life, then it's not in there yet. It's in your mouth, but it's not in your mind. So here you are going to hear it again. So the moment the thought of self-nature actually arises, there immediately arises the distinction, the process of distinction between self and other. The mind, therefore, arises in a dualistic fashion. Now, it doesn't stop there. If it just stopped there, probably there wouldn't be such a problem. But what happens at that point is that we must enter into a reactive mode, and that also happens practically simultaneously. In that, in order to determine the nature, the substance, and even the visibility of other, in order to make the distinction between self and other, one has to react toward other, or one will soon react toward other, with acceptance, rejection, or even indifference. But there is a reactive mode that we automatically enter into. And it's in that reactive mode that all problems actually are conceived, are actually born. And the way that they are born is that in order to have that reactive mode, the mind engages in discursive thought. It engages in the process of packaging, pigeonholing, describing, containing, limiting, defining, contriving. And this process leads to inflammation and exaggeration. The mind becomes inflamed with the energy or impulse of acceptance or rejection. Acceptance or rejection have within them quite naturally pushing or clinging. The mind becomes inflamed with that. And soon a process of exaggeration begins, again, almost immediately, in which one accepts or rejects, one pulls toward oneself, or one pushes away from oneself in such a way as to make artificial structures, thought processes, mental structures continuously occur. That's the way the mind works. these mental structures become, for us, our experience. So we lose the capacity, actually, to have true experience. Now, once again, for those of you that have never heard teachings from me before, you should know that in Buddhist tradition, a true experience, then, is only the experience of emptiness. You see? Only the experience of the primordial wisdom nature, that nature which is clear, uncontrived luminosity, the naturally wakeful state, without any distinction or contrivance. That is the nature, and that is the only true thought, in a sense, the only true experience. But since we are become automatically, upon the arising of the idea of self-nature as being inherently real, deeply involved in the process of distinction, reaction, and then eventually inflammation and exaggeration, that becomes our experience. And we buy in, hook, line, and sinker. Hooked by this experience, believing in it, trusting it. That experience, if examined, is completely touched by, poisoned by, the three root poisons: hatred, greed, and ignorance. Simply because those experiences are born of reaction. And we must react with repulsion or attraction. Even indifference occurs in accordance with the option of repulsion and attraction. It's still within it. It's like, if you can think of repulsion as one side of the coin and attraction as the same side of another of the same coin, you can think of indifference as the side of the coin, the rim of the coin. You can't really separate them. They're really the same function. And they have the same weight, in a sense. So because we are constantly involved in this reactive mode, this hatred, greed, and ignorance taints all of our experience. Every single factor within our experience has that. The most unfortunate thing about all of that is that it becomes such a deeply ingrained habitual tendency when you stop to consider that we have been doing this since the original conception of the idea of self-nature being inherently real, which did not happen last week, which didn't even happen when we were born. You couldn't be born if it just happened at that moment. Being born takes the idea of self-nature already established in order to be born. So this has happened somewhere in time out of mind, before things got around to getting born. This habitual tendency has been within the continuum of our mind stream since time out of mind, time that we cannot recollect. And this habitual tendency, therefore, is extremely profound, extremely strong, to the degree that we have no experience other than that habitual tendency of superstructuring, of making artificial structures that are an exaggeration of acceptance and rejection, an exaggeration also of the belief in self-nature as being inherently real. The problem, as I started to say, is that we have not only had all of our experience contained within that puffball, and it is a puffball. We have not only experienced everything that we've experienced and have all of our memory occurring within the pocket of this deeply reactive mode that we're in, but we've built an entire culture out of that. Our lives are constructed of that. Our culture is constructed of that. Our world is constructed of that. Every piece of any kind of experience that we can possibly imagine, in the past, present, or future, in any other universe even, anything that we can imagine is constructed of that. That is our experience. And we have actually begun to, not begun, we've been doing this for a long time actually, we are involved in creating value systems in which certain kinds of reaction are held up and certain kinds of reaction are not, but even if they're not held up, they're considered relevant and important. And in our own individual experience, and here's the real clincher, we spend 24 hours a day going from experience to experience to experience, from reaction to reaction to reaction. And that is our space and time grid. That is our experiential continuum. Going from reaction to reaction to reaction. And each one of them we believe important and real and true and honorable. In that, whatever they are, they define us. And even if we feel anger toward our parents because they did something to us, you don't want to say that you feel anger toward your parents. You have an inhibition about saying that, but in some deep sense it's honorable because it defines you. It makes it possible for you to be who you are. You know? And even if we have some reaction toward the world around us, which is a hateful reaction towards neighbors and friends, get angry, we take issue with certain things and become sort of hatefully fixated on something. We don't ever want to use the word hate. We have a real problem saying that we feel that way. We don't want to confess. But within the depth of our minds, it's a noble thing. We have an issue, therefore I am. Was it Khalil Gibran who said, I think, or as I feel, therefore I am? Didn't he say that? No, I think Gibran said that as well, didn't he? I feel, therefore I am. Was it I think? Well, anyway, one of them said one of those, and the other... Now, you see, there you go. Are you right? Are you happy? You could have just said, yes, teacher, buona. But no. No, I'm just kidding. Of course, I'm glad that you helped me out with that. But that's what we do. In our minds, these kinds of thoughts are like little bright lights, and we let ourselves follow them around, not realizing that we are involved in this complete delusion and drunkenness. It's a narcotic. The posture of our mind, therefore, involved in this reactive mode, in living in this puffball, in this superstructure that has nothing to do with our primordial wisdom nature, nothing to do with the purely awakened state, in which we cannot taste the nature of emptiness, the nature of our mind. To be involved in such a process is as superficial as the mindlessness of a moth that keeps beating itself against a light bulb. It's the same. It's not noble at all. And yet every time we have a thought, we're so happy we could throw a party. I mean, every time we have a reaction, we think we're just so hot, we can hardly believe it. We've been defined again, yeah. We're so happy about that. So, that being the case, we're very much like moths that are just beating ourselves against this light bulb until we become burnt out, which we do, and exhausted, which we do, and then we die, just like the moth. And to spend our whole lives like that, when it is possible to look beneath the surface, when it is possible to disengage from that habitual reactive mode, to stop looking at these bright lights, fascinating only because they are reactive in their nature. Fascinating only because it's easy for us and that we are habitually involved in such things. That instead we could stand back and taste what really is. Well, let's take, for instance, the practice of devotion as is practiced in Vajrayana Buddhism. What are you doing right now? I'm being kind of funny, right? Are you a little entertained? Mark, are you entertained? I'm so happy. Are all of you entertained? I can crack a few more jokes. I'm good at this. So you're mildly entertained. Is that what I'm understanding? Okay, you're mildly entertained. Okay, Mark is very entertained, but you are mildly entertained. Now that we have determined that and we know who you are, what you're allowing yourself to do in your mind right now is to just watch this thing very passively, the way a moth watches a light bulb. You just kind of ride on it. You're on the surface of it. You're playing with it. You let yourself look at that light, and it's very passive, it's very habitual, it's very comfortable, nothing much happening. And you interpret all of the data that you're hearing and seeing according to your already preconceived belief in self-nature as being inherently real, and it goes through the filter of your five senses and your particular habitual tendencies, the karma of your mind, and you're watching me in that way. Let's say that instead one of you wakes up and gets the big picture, and you look at the teacher and you say, this is in fact my own primordial wisdom nature. This is in fact my own nature. This is the nature of emptiness, penetrating somehow into the drug haze, the narcotic haze of this fixation process that I am habitually involved in. Let's say that you saw it just for a minute, got the big picture, and instead of reacting in the superficial way, the way moths react, instead of dancing around and just allowing yourself to go from puffball to puffball, let's say for one moment you allowed yourself to be deeper than that. You allowed yourself to go deeply, sinking into the nature of emptiness, sinking into the awareness of the primordial wisdom nature. Just for one moment. It's probably not going to happen. Because even now, as I'm speaking, you're having a reaction to the way that I'm saying it. You're trying to ride through on that reaction. You're trying to taste it in that way. And it's not the same. It's very, very difficult to understand. But we go through our whole lives with this superficiality, with this stupidness. And that's ignorance, one of the three root poisons. We forget. We just constantly allow ourselves to forget, to not awaken to the primordial wisdom state, but instead to remain fixated on an artificial continuum that we ourselves structured out of a mistaken belief in self-nature as being inherently real. The saddest part about it, unfortunately, is our determination to allow that to continue, our satisfaction with that, our happiness about it, our rejection of what it takes to go deeper. And of course we see that appearing in the world as hunger, war, suffering, all of which are demonstrations of our inability to accept the responsibility of direct experience. Even we who've been practicing for some time allow ourselves to be seduced by these ideas and values of stupid things that have happened to us, and think that they are important, that they've somehow formed us, that they mean something about us. This contrived meaning is the stew that we live in. And yet we miss the point. Because the more assurance you have that these experiences have defined you and shaped you and made you and tell you what you are, oh yes, I'm Mr. Dashing, I'm Mr. Sexy, I'm Miss Betty Cook, what is it, Betty Crocker? I forgot, it's been a long time. Betty Crocker? Right, yeah, right. Do you know who Betty Crocker is? She forgot too. Terry knows who Betty Crocker is. We define ourselves in these ways and have these thoughts and move ourselves through these images and pictures that we think have something to do with anything, that describe us in some way. And yet we miss the point. Those of us that are most deeply embedded in those kinds of emotional, intellectual contrivances are actually the ones that are the furthest away from direct experience, pure perception. And yet, unfortunately, they are also the most convinced that they're the closest. We should think about the fact that in most of the world's major religions, children are commendable. They are commented on as being able to learn somehow better than us. I don't know whether it's children exactly or whether it's a more relaxed, childlike posture that is really the goal, really the happening event here. One that is free of contrivance, one that is not so wrapped up in these artificial superstructures that can just look with open eyes. Can you look with open eyes without closing your eyes? Can you have some kind of direct experience? What's a direct experience? Is it a reaction? Have you ever had a mystical experience during which you felt bliss? You ever had a big deal experience that you thought was so wonderful? But you know what? I bet it was an emotional experience. I bet it was reactive. Because each one of us wants to have an experience like that. I'm talking about something different. I'm talking about an experience by which you cannot possibly define self-nature. You can say you've had a bliss experience, and then after that you're a person who's had a bliss experience. But that's not it. This is a hard thing for new practitioners to really think about. And it's almost not fair. It's like asking a new practitioner to have the maturity, it's like asking an 18-year-old to have the maturity of a 50-year-old. Maybe it can't be done. However, I think from the very beginning we can caution ourselves. I think we can at least plant the idea that there is something a lot deeper than this narcotic experience of continuum that we are involved in. That these ideas that we structure about ourselves don't amount to anything. They're meaningless, and in fact they are a deterrent to direct experience. That once you've defined yourself, you're as good as dead in the water. That according to what practice is really supposed to do, according to what it's really about, the experience that one is after is naked experience. Is naked experience, uncontrived, undifferentiated. The one that if you have for just a moment, within a state of spaciousness, you cannot possibly walk away from and define yourself with. You simply become more awake. So, what I'm saying then today is that it's time to shake loose, really, shake free of the determination to be involved in this superficial kind of experiential mode in which you make all kinds of meaningless judgments and contrivances that, if examined, absolutely have their basis in the incorrect assumption of self-nature as being inherently real, and absolutely have their basis in hatred, greed, and ignorance, in that they are completely filled with those poisons. They're deeply reactive and therefore useless modes of thinking. And that each one of us in our own way, as practitioners, whether we are moving along the path very nicely, just considering the path, or involved in some meditation of our own kind, whatever it is that we are, what we can do is to be determined to have some mindset, some goal that is a heck of a lot deeper than the superficiality of contrived experience. We can go deeper into our practice. We can be determined to awaken to pure view, free of all the stupidity that we've been making our lives out of so far. We could start by seeing what's really precious. We could start by seeing what's right in front of us. We could start by being determined to have direct view. We can start by being determined to see the nature of our own mind. We can start by being determined to hold in our hearts the preciousness of this opportunity and the preciousness of the ability to even consider awakening to the primordial wisdom state. There is no experience that we can have in cyclic existence that compares with that, of course. And why is this experience of the primordial wisdom state so important? Because every other kind of experience that you can have, that is to say the ones that begin in the idea of self-nature as being inherently real, the ones that actually originate in cyclic existence, have to be impermanent, have to be dissatisfying, have to fade away, have to be disappointing. They have to be. By their nature, they must be. And that everything in cyclic existence is born, and everything in cyclic existence therefore will die. But the direct experience of the primordial wisdom state is separate from that entirely. It is unborn, ungenerated, uncontrived, luminous, spontaneously arising, and fundamentally complete. And that being the case, it is the true nature, and it is the naked state to which we should hold. Don't throw your pearls before swine. Don't waste yourself. Don't waste this life. Don't be a sleeper who just will not get out of the bed. Wake up and see what your nature is. Experience directly the depth of your own mind. Cut through in your practice. Nanda.